super excited to introduce our session, a model for partner participation in open source community projects. And today we have our esteemed faculty to talk us through this awesome session. But before we get there, I wanted to make sure we covered our forward-looking statement. As you know, we may talk about some things in the future that aren't necessarily available today. So we ask that you just make your purchasing or buying decisions on what's currently available. And now over to our esteemed panel, Sherry Carlson and Brian Pickett of North Peak and Corey O'Brien, our open source program manager here at Salesforce. Corey, can I hand it over to you?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Let me share my screen, and then I'm going to kick it straight over to Sherry to get us going here on, or I'm sorry, I'm going to kick it over to Brian, but let me share my screen first. Thank you all so much for joining us. Really, really excited that you want to learn more about the open source commons and how North Peak is contributing. Let me just make sure I'm sharing here. Okay, someone confirm you can see the deck.
Looks great, Corey.
Okay, pass, there we go. Okay, here we go. Brian, please kick us off.
Excellent. Thanks for joining, everyone. I'm looking through the faces and I know about half of you. It's wonderful to see some old colleagues and friends and new folks who are clearly in our space. I am happy to share North Peak's involvement in the Outbound Funds module, because we all thought it was a good example of an SI partner kind of really going deep with community participation. And, you know, kind of if we could discuss the reasonings behind that, hopefully we can find some ways for you all in your firms to kind of make participation in open source initiatives and sprint activities and all that fun stuff, make that kind of a strategic priority for you. So again, my name is Brian Pickett. I am the founder and CEO of North Peak Solutions. I've been in CRM since 1999, focused on nonprofit tech since 2003, and North Peak's been around since 2013. We are a .org partner since whenever that began. We will talk more about North Peak because I do find that is a critical piece of this story. So that'll come later though. For now, let's introduce the rest of the team. Sherry, would you like to introduce yourself?
Of course, I am Sherry. I'm a senior consultant at North Peak. I've been here since 2019, and I get to work with nonprofits and foundations, and of course, Salesforce. I've also been a member of the Outbound Funds community team since its inception at the Community Sprint in 2017. I'm going to pass it over to Corey to introduce herself.
Well, hi, everyone. I recognize a bunch of faces on here, but not everyone. I'd love to see them, as I just put in the chat. I am Corey O'Brien. I am the open source program manager at Salesforce, primarily working with the open source commons program, which runs the community sprints, which you may have heard of. And we'll talk quite a bit more about how you all can get involved and what's the commons and what are community sprints in a little bit. But I've been here since 2018 and attending our community event since 2015. So really excited to be talking with you all today.
All right, so for our agenda, you've got it on the screen here. Introductions, we're nearly through. We'll do some more context building with introducing the Outbound Funds module. If you haven't used that or familiar with it, let you know how that works. And then we'll get into kind of North Peak's involvement. And you'll see it from two different perspectives. My perspective as the kind of executive level person here, and then Sherry's perspective as a team member, because those are there's two different motivations there, or at least they're crossing, but it'll be helpful, let's put it that way. Beyond that, we'll leave some time for to discuss like the actual specific reasons we're involved, the benefits, and then get into some Q&A. In terms of questions, do feel free to chat them. I think that's what you've all been allocated as well in terms of your participation today.
So put in your questions.
Yeah, we'll keep an eye on that, and if we can answer them in line with the presentation, we'll do that. Otherwise, we'll circle back at the end. All right, so let's get into this. What is Outbound Funds module. Corey, mind moving to the next? Everyone, just so you know, the slide deck, not nearly as important as the discussion. It's more to keep us moving. So, but that here we have a good use of it where we get to explain the Outbound Funds module. Key takeaways here. This is an open source solution meant to create kind of a standard within the sector here of how organizations will manage kind of distributions of funds. This would be really a primary function of a foundation who's granting out money, or a scholarship organization who's supporting people's participation in different educational activities. And that whole kind of structure of accepting applications, managing disbursements, gaining insight into all that work is really the purpose of the Outbound Fund module. You can think of it also as like the precursor to Salesforce.org's grant management product, precursor and foundation of the paid grants management products coming out. Sherry, do you want to talk a little about the timeline for Outbound Funds?
I'd love to. So on the next slide, we'll see that the Outbound Funds started actually as just a conversation in the community in about 2015. And then in 2017, in August, at the Community Sprint in Chicago, a group of us spent 2 days discussing and building a data model. And we came out of that sprint with a beta or demo org fully built out. Our first release was actually in June of 2018, which marked the first time that organizations could install the package. And then in 2019, we joined the open source commons and made it through security review. So we were actually officially on the App Exchange. And then in spring of 2020, the Outbound Funds module became an official Salesforce.org product. I am going to hand it over to Corey to give a bit of background on the open source commons and community sprints.
First, I should unmute. Yes, thank you, Sherry. Salesforce.org has a history of open source. Many of our products are open source today. And we've always believed that solving the world's biggest problems requires a community-based approach. It's what we've done since day one. And as you might be aware, or probably aware, the flagship nonprofit cloud product, NPSP, Nonprofit Success Pack, is open source. And it started with nearly 100% community contribution way back in the day, 10 years ago plus, back in 2006. I have my slides right here. Very little code, very little of that was actually contributed by Salesforce.org employees. And we now have 6 different open source products across the nonprofit and educational space that are still open source and are the foundation for many of our other products. As Brian said, we can extend them. And historically, this has made it possible for our generous community, our partners, our users, to contribute and to collaborate and to improve the products in a trusted and transparent way. More recently, we've started the open source commons, and that really has helped to give tools and training for our community who are looking to contribute, generally now beside or on top of our official products within the clouds. So that's how the Outbound Funds product came to be. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along today, but yeah, so it's really an incredible program that gives the tools for contribution. The program has 3 real pillars. We have the collaboration spaces. So many of you have probably heard of open source community sprints. I can see some of you raise your hand or put into the chat if you've been to one of our sprint events. I know some of you have. And this is where we bring the community together. So this has been happening for a very long time. Before we had the Power of Us Hub, we had the Google group that my director, Judy Sohn, started. Some of you may remember that. We have our sprints. We have now the Power of Us Hub. We've got the Trailblazer community. Yeah, I see some of you have coming. And this is where the community is getting together. that's one pillar of it. It's a very important part of it. We've had to switch to virtual, of course. We can't do things in person right now, but we will. We will come back to that. Enabling the community is also a major part of the commons. It's easy for someone to contribute something, but to contribute, in a quality way, something that is going to actually help the most people is really important. So we do things like share best practices with each other. We train on GitHub. We've done some design sprint training. We do all kinds of different trainings if you're a part of one of our commons teams or you're coming to a sprint, to really enable the community to contribute in the best way possible. And the point of that, the reason for this, is to lead with trust and sustainability. It's one thing to install an open source application. It's another to know it's still going to be there for you in a year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now. What happens if a bug pops up? Who's going to be there to fix it? Who's going to answer your questions? So we really help our teams that are contributing figure out the best way to do this sustainably and with trust. So part of that is going through the App Exchange security review process if you have a product. And there's a variety of other ways: healthy team building, leaders, transition process. And Sherry and I will talk a little bit more about that as we move on today. One of the major parts of the open source commons is our partner participation. So at our events, we have roughly 35% of our sprint registrants are partners, and that's really important. We'll talk a little bit more about this as well, but just know you all are so important to this process. We literally could not do this without you and partners like North Peak. So I'm really excited to be talking with you all about this today and give you some information on how you can contribute and what it means to contribute. I'm going to pass it over to Brian. We're going to go over a little bit of an overview now, I think, and sort of why and how North Peak is involved.
Thanks, Corey. I know the slide deck well. There is a happy faces slide.
Oh,
I think,
yes.
next.
Aww.
Maybe just leave it on that one for a second.
Forgot about that one.
So, this is definitely, I'm gonna tell the story of North Peak's involvement here, and there's gonna be kind of two elements to it. There's like a baseline, which is like, generally, why does North Peak participate in general community activities? And that kind of sets the stage for like why we went deep with Outbound Funds, because we went deep. Like, there was a big investment here, and that's not what everyone has to do, but this is something we did, and it'd be helpful to know kind of why we went so deep with Outbound Funds. So historically, like Outbound Funds, if you kind of think of what it is and who is trying to serve, I mean, there's certainly a wide swath of nonprofits who are tracking out, money going out the door. And then there's like the foundation sector, which is like, that's their gig. So the conversations about having a tool like Outbound Funds, they date back a while. They predate the 2017 sprint. We were involved in those informally and formally because we liked the idea of like what NPSP provides for nonprofits. It's like this light framework. You can take it, then configure it to your specific processes at that point. But having that starting point accelerates you incredibly in all these ways that are standard across the industry. So you can then connect with other organizations. Their setup is going to be similar to yours. Your team members that you hire might have familiarity with it. Like, there's all these reasons to have like a standard platform, and we really liked that idea, and it didn't exist. Those early conversations, it really boiled down to there wasn't enough community support to make it exist. Like, us doing it alone wasn't going to create an industry standard. Anyone doing it alone, there was other people that actually really wanted to do it alone, and like we talked with them, and we all then agreed, like, look, we need more people. And that's where in Chicago, I think Sherry will talk more about how it came together there. But, our involvement formalized at that Chicago sprint. The picture Sherry shared earlier only had the back of Sherry's head. I don't know, you can't really recognize her, but another member of the team at that table was on our team. We evolved from that sprint into a kind of a leadership role in between sprints. We would show up at sprints and drive it forward for a few years. When .org got involved to make it a standard product, we helped to shepherd that transition, and then now we're in a different mode because .org has it as a product, and our mode is really working with the community, advocating for it, and really kind of talking about how it can set organizations on a really great path.
And just to add to that, Brian, I just wanted to reiterate, your involvement in this app at the beginning was critical, because it's one thing for a customer to know what they need for their specific use cases, but you as a partner had so much experience in what a variety of customers were going to need. So the fact that North Peak was involved from the very beginning, I think, was a huge key to making Outbound Funds come to life. So I just wanted to reiterate that.
Excellent. All right, so let's go to the next slide, because it talks about why does that make sense for us? Mm-hmm. This is what you kind of need to know about North Peak, and this is just who we are. We are involved in this because we think use of CRM and these types of tools is like a standard now. It's not like a nice to have. This is like tried and true now, and let's work on elevating the space so that expectations are different. We should be good at our CRM. We shouldn't just get a CRM. And so we kind of sum it up with this idea of CRM-centric nonprofits. I'll visit that again later, but it's a bit beyond what our written job description is, which is those services here. You can see, we're a lot like most SI partners. We do consultations, we do implementations, we do success work. We're expanding or supporting our clients. Our focus areas, nonprofits, generally foundations, affiliated networks, and affordable housing. Sure, everyone's kind of got their specialty or area that they work in. So these are really, we're a lot like you. Our values might be unique to us, but these values are kind of where this all started. This is who we are, and these are the reasons we're participating in general with the community, be it on the Power of Us Hub or at sprints. We were early folks working on documentation around .org, training videos, stuff like that. It's because of who we are. Sharing is a core value of ours. We are experts. We want to see this sector improve. We need to share what we know. Caring about people's outcomes here. If you see a problem in the space, then it's going to create a bunch of issues. We care about seeing that resolved. High quality, evolve. These are all good reasons to get out of your seat and go to a sprint, to sit with customers, sit with other consultants, learn what's going on, learn how to address different situations. This, actually participating in community activities equips us to stay kind of abreast of what's going on. So, and then beyond that, we're a small consulting firm. Consulting firms are largely reputation based, especially ones like us, where we're a bit boutique. We focus on high quality. Our reputation is important. Who knows about us is important. So building a network is helpful for us in a lot of different ways. Community sprints, community activities, this gives you a chance to do what you do best. Networking, that might not be what you do best, but banging out an awesome Salesforce solution, that's probably what you're really good at. And here you get to demonstrate those skill sets in front of folks. So that is a great, great vehicle for kind of just showing who you are so more people know about you. So generally, right? We were participating in activities because it creates this vibrant community, and we operate in that community. A rising tide lifts all boats. Now, Outbound Funds and the leadership that we have with this module, this was this whole nother level of involvement. It was a significant investment, even by our standards. we are incredibly excited about that investment. Like, this is not a negative. This is a great thing. It offered this really big, big payoff because now there literally is a market that we can work in. And I'm going to explain that in a second here. The market for a grant management solution, outbound funds, like, we didn't make that market. That's been there. There's entrenched technology. Foundations have been using it for years. It just did not meet with our philosophy of CRM-centric nonprofits. We feel like, in this new normal, you have to get your technology and it has to be good, but then you have to know how to use it, and you have to probably update how you do your job so that it's running through the system. And in doing so, you're going to ask for that system to change a little bit so that it matches your job better. And that kind of dynamic is super helpful and healthy. You should have a system that is largely in line with your peer organizations, but also have an ability to customize it around your needs. And we didn't feel like there was a real solution for that kind of approach. And feel free to debate me on that. But this was us in our assessment. So having Outbound Funds now in place really creates this market that we're able to practice our trade in. So from a business standpoint, fundamentally, like, it did not exist. We could not work with foundations because the tools weren't there. And now the tools are there. So that is the biggest takeaway for us. Now, why this? Why us? Like, there's a few things here. One, as Corey points out, that early sprint and really the activity of participating in an open source initiative is like high level consulting, but doing it with multiple clients at once. And really clients that aren't even at the table. Like, you have to imagine more clients. This line item under focus areas here for affiliated networks, no one probably knows what that is, but I can describe a few examples. Like a national organization that has chapters. This is a network where everyone kind of looks the same, everyone kind of does the same thing. And how can we put in place a technology that is kind of the same for them, where they can have a lower cost of entry, they can network with their peers about how did you use it, what do I do from here? And so we've been doing that since 2012, before I even started North Peak. And we have a particular expertise in helping these national organizations work with their network to create essentially an app that is for their network. And so with Outbound Funds, not only did we want to work in the foundation sector, but we had the particular expertise to help in the moment that it was being created. We knew how to work with networks, or basically lots of different organizations, to pull together priorities, to actually vet those priorities and decide what should go in the package and what should not, which is incredibly important. So we had the expertise, we had the interest, and again, we're kind of built this way. So, we jumped at the opportunity to get involved. I'm checking my notes here. I don't think there was much more I wanted to share right now about that. Happy to answer any questions on that, but so just put them into the chat. But for this point, I'm going to turn it over to Sherry to share a little perspective from a different angle. She's a co-leader of a group. She's been involved in this for a long time. Sherry, you want to talk about kind of how and why you're involved?
Definitely. I'm first going to take a moment and talk about the benefits of North Peak's approach to community contributions from a perspective of a professional services team member, because it's just different, right? I am not the CEO, I'm not the founder of North Peak. I am a consultant out there doing consulting every day. And I'm able to contribute to OFM because of the support and the structure at North Peak. I'm encouraged to find ways to contribute to the community as a part of my yearly professional development and engagement plan. We have a specific plan that has yearly and quarterly goals that are a part of my job that are tied back to that plan and to this work. And it actually is part of how I get my bonuses, to be perfectly honest, right? And then let's get real for a moment. A consultant's time at a consulting firm is its revenue. But I have a way to track my time where I'm not penalized for the time that I spent on outbound funds. And I know Brian doesn't always think of this as revolutionary, but to me as a consultant, that just takes the pressure and stress off of me, because I'm not thinking, oh goodness, I should be billing. I'm thinking I get to contribute. And I also don't have to take PTO or pay out of my pocket to attend community sprints, which again, feels like an obvious benefit, but it's not always the case. So as an employee, I really appreciate North Peak's emphasis and living out their and striving for their values. Because there's a risk as a consultant to feel like a kind of a revenue generating billable machine. And this focus on values just kind of balances out my work and my life in a way that's, I think, really unique. But I do want to dig deeper into the OFM story. North Peak has had somebody, as Brian mentioned, in the role of co-leader since right after the sprint in 2017. My role back then was not at North Peak, and actually my role in Outbound Funds was documentation. But I've been a co-leader with 2 other amazing community members since early in 2019. When Outbound Funds was a community project with the Open Source Commons, co-leaders filled all of the typical roles. We were product manager, we were marketer, we were solution architect, we were developers, we were QA, and we were documentation. So in 2019 and 20, I primarily filled the role of product and people manager, which meant I spent an hour or 2 a week working on things like communicating with the team, leading sprints, leading group meetings, directing the team's work between the sprints, and working on presentations for conferences and other user groups. This work was really important to me. It's a connection into a community of people who care about good work and supporting the missions of nonprofits. Sprints and working on the OFM team is really the place where I feel at home in my work, because I get to contribute to something that supports grant makers and nonprofits across the board to achieve their missions, which is the whole reason I'm in the Salesforce ecosystem. I'd also, as a side benefit, stretched my leadership skills and my knowledge of both grant making and the software development world. And I should say it wasn't just me at North Peak, as Brian mentioned, contributing to Outbound Funds. Other team members have been involved in conversations regarding the vision of OFM and where it's going next, and with the marketing to help get the word out about releases and case studies. And that leadership really became important when Salesforce was interested in offering OFM as an official product. I want to take a few minutes and talk about that transition to being a Salesforce.org official product, because I think it's really important to understand the transition. And to really get it, you have to go back to that sprint in August of 2017. The group's goal and purpose at that sprint was to have this thing that we were creating be a part of NPSP. It was, after all, back then, the NPSP sprint. We assumed during that sprint that what we were building was going to become a part of NPSP. But after some conversations that fall, it was clear that Salesforce just wasn't ready for it and didn't really see a widespread need for the grants management piece at that time. So we decided to carry forward as a community-led project. So in early 2020, when Judy Sohn called and wanted to start a conversation with the co-leaders and subsequently the team about shifting the leadership of the package to Salesforce, we were beyond excited. We were really ready for it. We had been working on it for 2 years, and we were thrilled to have that conversation. Because not only could the transition get the package to a wider audience, it really felt like it could finally achieve this goal that we set out a few years prior. There were many conversations with Salesforce and among the community team to make sure we all felt comfortable with the next steps. So it was a really smooth and nice transition. But Corey, can you talk a bit about that transition from Salesforce's perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. And just before I do that, I'm going to stop share. I didn't want to interrupt you because there was so much goodness going on there. I'm going to stop share so we can see each other. And everyone can see us rather than a slide. Our slides pick up again later. So yeah, whoa, right? This is why I said at the beginning, like, this is such an incredible opportunity to get everyone involved. And I'm so excited to share how North Peak has been involved. So as you said, your team's original goal, I know you weren't leading the team back then, but you were on the team way back in Chicago. And just to be clear, there was members from North Peak, other partner organizations, and customers all forming around this same idea, this idea to bring outbound funds to the NPSP. So when the team said, yes, we want to build this, we want to contribute it to the NPSP, we want this to be available to all, they weren't thinking in their head, we are going to become an ISV partner. We are going to produce an app and build an app and bring it through the app exchange security review process, and then support it and document it and keep building it and versioning it. They weren't thinking about this at the beginning. This is what happens when you have a good idea and you don't want to let it die. To be fair, why the open source commons program was created. So ideas like this don't just die when they don't really have a place to go. So it was your original goal to contribute into the NPSP. At the time, though, we know that .org wasn't ready for it. The NPSP product managers they have their own roadmap, and it just wasn't something that they were prepared to accept and build in at the time. So jump 3 years later, and they were ready. I'm not a program manager, so I can't speak to why and sort of how all of that happened necessarily, but they were ready for it at that point, and they loved it. It was popular. They made an intentional decision to keep the base of a grant, program open source. And at that point, why reinvent the wheel when there's a popular community created solution that already exists? So because the goal was contribution, those conversations started. It was done with trust and with transparency. And, Sherry, you can speak to sort of how your end of those conversations went, because I know it was my director, my boss, Judy Stone, that was more involved with that at the time. But it was just such a light bulb moment internally here, such a no-brainer for us to have that conversation. Yeah, so how did that go from team leader perspective? You guys must have been a little excited, or were you a little nervous? What was that like?
So what's super interesting about that is the 3 co-leaders, we just got super excited, and we were like ready to hand everything over and it just like go with it. And we actually had a conversation with Brian, and he was like, what's really important here? And I think that's part of what North Peak and aka Brian and Teresa really brought into that transition, was that it allowed us to pause and really consider what was important. It was about accountability. We wanted to make sure that OFM stayed true to its original vision. And Salesforce was super open to those conversations and confirming that it was going to continue to be a free, open source, kind of evolving solution, that they weren't just going to take and run and we would be left standing there. The other thing that Brian really encouraged us to do is to do the transition well. There is a history that wasn't so pretty, and we wanted to do this better. We wanted to do it different and show how this kind of partnership between a community group and Salesforce could work well and have really open and honest communication as we walked through it.
Yeah, agreed. And that's kind of key, right? This partnership. And just so you know, Sherry, we have a question in the chat. So at any moment there, take a look and we can answer that. But the partnership is key. This is unique. We have never done this before, which is have a product team internally at salesforce.org that includes a product manager, writers, engineers, testers, documentation, all of the above, working directly alongside a community team consistently. There's been, other similar things like customer advisory boards. Our product managers do a ton of research when they are building new products, building new features, but we've never done it just like this. Sherry, so let's talk about that a little bit, about, you know, how the last year has been. We have monthly meetings. So the open source commons project teams, when you're officially in the program, you're required to sort of prove you're meeting regularly and consistently. And normally the teams will do that with a monthly meeting with everyone on the team or volunteers meet, and I join the calls as well. And we talk about roadmap, we talk about goals, we talk about sprint events, we talk about all kinds of things. So that hasn't stopped, has it?
Not at all. Well, I was going to say we've been doing it since 2017, even before the open source commons started. So we've been meeting monthly as a team. It's been my most consistent meeting for the last, 4 or 5 years here. But now there is a team, there are members of Salesforce.org that join us. I think the real unique part of that, as you mentioned, it's product managers, it's lead engineers, it's other technical staff, but it's led by the community. I am still the person who sets the agenda. I'm still the person who says, hey, so Annie wants to have a conversation. Annie, what's your agenda item today? And it's led and kind of it's led by the community. It's a conversation and it's a collaboration together.
Right. So I think that's the difference, right? It's not led by Salesforce. It's led by the community. And in our conversations with the product managers, they find so much value in these monthly meetings, because they get to, you know, bounce roadmap ideas off of you. You all, because of your involvement, literally get to influence the direction of an open source product, and understand its roadmap and what's coming and the decisions behind new features or changes. You know, and I think, I don't want to speak for you, but I think that's extremely valuable as a partner, because not only were you involved, but you are involved. You're still involved, and you will be involved tomorrow, which is such a great opportunity.
Yeah. And that's a key part, not only for me personally, for that, like part of what I really enjoy about Outbound Funds is actually the community of people I get to work with, right? The team that's been together for 4 years. But the second piece of that is, as a partner, North Peak, it's a benefit to be able to have that input and that influence on what's being provided to the community, what the product is going to be, to have that voice in a very unique way.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Right. Just to interject, I think the one value I didn't talk about earlier was accountability, and this plays right into that. Like, we're accountable to our clients for delivering a high quality solution, and we were able to influence how that solution developed. We had insight right at the beginning, the data model, the pieces of the decisions. Like, we were able to influence the outcome in the way that, you know, we felt was going to lead for the best result for everyone. So it wasn't for our purposes, but because it was done with our input, we had more confidence in that the solution was going to be the right one for our clients.
Right. Robin, thank you. Robin's put a comment in the chat saying thank you, and that it's been impactful for many nonprofits. That's literally the goal of all of this, right? It's the goal of the open source commons, it's the goal of community sprints, is our community of partners and customers. We're already coming together and trying to solve problems for each other and then share those solutions. It's the nature of our nonprofit and educational community. We've just, you know, given it a little bit of a framework, a little bit of a support, saying, if you have this idea, others have done it before you, this is the path you can take. You know, form your community around you. We have conversations, come to our events, let's recruit volunteers around this idea. And if it's an app, because not everything ends up being an application, to be honest, or a package. But if it is, you know, let's make sure it's trusted by our community. Let's make sure no one installs it in production without it having security review. And that's not something that is possible unless you're an ISV partner or a partner who is an App Exchange partner. So this is the first time in all of Salesforce that a group of volunteers can put an application, a package, through the Salesforce security review. And that's huge. And we haven't really touched on that. This call isn't about the open source commons necessarily. I'll have other talks about that. This is your involvement. But anyway, I just wanted to touch on that because the process that this team has gone through helped us shape the open source commons and make it possible and make it easier for others to do what you have done. So yeah, Brian, on that note, how would you sort of recommend others get involved if they did want to get involved?
Right. Okay. So first of all, thank you for that, Corey. And I will just take this opportunity, since she's thanking us, I need to then thank everyone else, because it's not North Peak. This is not North Peak's product. This is just North Peak as the big investor with others that have put lots of time and energy and experience into it. So,
and to add to that, one of the requirements of being in the open source commons is that the core team has members from at least 3 different organizations. So someone from North Peak, sure, love it, but also others. This is a very important concept because you need to have variety and diversity in the team in order to make a healthy team, a successful team, a good product. So yeah.
Okay, so in terms of how to get involved, I mean, you kind of all here have the tools because you do something that is related to putting together open source products, getting them out into the market, and having them kind of form the basis of like a vibrant community, right? If you're an ISV partner, like you produce an app and like you support that app, and there's like advertising and like onboarding, like you have all this expertise that people have to go through when it comes to an open source initiative. In fact, just for us, I mean, we started with a real technical consulting side, and then as the initiative evolved, what we noticed was there was a real lack of communication around it. If you were an app provider and you launched a new app and it was available, you'd be, your marketing and communications team would be like doing tons of stuff, and that there was no one filling that role. And so we volunteered to fill that role. And so we started putting together a newsletter, collecting case studies, like doing the things that show the market, like this is a real option. And then once, Salesforce.org got involved, the ground shifted a little bit. So what can we do to help communicate to organizations how they would engage with the Outbound Funds initiative? So we produced a white paper, we interviewed people, we have done a webinar, like we're out there helping in the way that we can to create a vibrant community around this initiative, because that's what will benefit. I mean, business-wise, that's what will benefit us. We do it because it's like how we let our freak flag fly, right? But it's also going to benefit us because it creates this community for us to operate in.
Yeah, agreed. And I came from a partner before I started my career here at Salesforce, and so I get it. It's such a great opportunity for you to share your brand, why you're involved, attract employees, attract customers. Like you being involved is just good on all the fronts.
I'll pick that up. I agree. It's great for us in a number of different ways. One, we're now a recognized leader within Outbound Funds. So we know the product. People know that we know the product. That's wonderful. Two, like our team members have developed professionally because of their involvement. And Sherry, I am talking about you now. Apologies. Talking about others as well. But everyone who's gotten a chance to get involved, comes out of it with some new skills, knowing new people. Like they develop their own network. Like it's beneficial for them as well. One example, from this initiative, we had one of our team members get an MVP status for their participation. And frankly, we should have 2. Sherry, I'm looking at you, but it's out of your control. So if anyone here is on that MVP voting committee, I want to talk with you. And really for us, like, I think most importantly, a lot of the benefits here are intangible. There's not that many examples of us going to a sprint, meeting a customer, working with that customer. Like there's not so much of a direct line benefit. It's just that you're doing something that is going to have a bunch of intangible benefits or tangible benefits. You do it, and then things tend to go well for you.
Right. Yeah, some of our conversations we've had, Brian, this isn't a sales lead generating activity necessarily, right? You don't go to the sprint or you don't participate looking to sell your services. You do it to be involved, to gain experience. Yeah, we've had some laughs about that, because it's just, it's not what you expect if you're going
Totally.
with that, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Just my advice is go, be open, share, good things happen. There was a question earlier, like to Sherry, like how do you track your time so that it, doesn't create additional pressure for you, I think is the main thing. And you did mention you track it in our time tracking system.
Yeah, I was like, that feels like a very silly thing to say, but that's, yeah.
I think I can add context to that. So we have billable targets. Most of you probably have billable targets. I would love to hear from others who do not and how you do that. I don't necessarily like billable targets, but as Sherry points out, our billable work is the revenue driver, so whatever. We've decided that certain activities are really outside of that. And so if you kind of looked at a quarter and you said, all right, there's 13 weeks to the quarter, 40 hours a week, there's a certain amount of hours people are going to be working for you, and you apply a billable percentage to that, you might get a number. Well, we will essentially discount that total hour. The total available hours to apply that percentage to gets reduced based on certain things. I mean, like PTO, right? Someone can go on vacation for a week and we don't want them to then get back and be like, oh crap, I need to make up 30 hours of billable work. Excuse my language. The conference, sprints, this type of open source participation is the same thing for us. You can participate and it will essentially lower the total hours we are going to apply that billable percentage to. There's, for us, like we do have guidelines around like, well, what is the total hours that I can sprint? Like, can I sprint all the time? And I think we are a generous firm when it comes to that, or at least as who we are has created what might be a higher number of hours available for this type of stuff than other firms. And we've run up against limits. Like we've got people who love this stuff and they want to do it all the time. And so we've had to have some conversations about like realistically how much time you can put to this.
I love that and I hate that all at the same time somehow.
Billable targets, I love and hate.
Yeah, no, they're so fun. Especially the in-person sprint events, right? It's such an amazing learning experience. We have flown through this hour. We have 10 minutes left, and we did want to leave some time for Q&A. And I know there's a couple in the chat, so I'm going to share my screen. Our Alex has thrown up a poll here, so go ahead and do the poll while I bring up my screen. Okay, so if you're still doing the poll, awesome. If not, then take a look at the screen. We would recommend, I'll get my poll out of the way there. We would recommend taking a screenshot of this. Just note Bitly's are case sensitive, but this is all the different ways that you can get involved. You can learn more about Salesforce.org's open source history. You can learn more about the open source commons. You can learn more about our community sprint events, and got to throw it out here. The next one is June 9th and 10th. So you can register, you can tell your staff to register. We have 14 active projects that are available for you to choose when you register for a sprint, Outbound Funds being one of them. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot of different ways for you all to get involved and to get your staff involved. So take a look. And then we have some other resources here that you'll probably find interesting. So questions, and go ahead and put any other questions that you have in the chat. I'm scrolling right now. I'm just going to exit out of the poll here. Time tracking we answered. Dave's going to get us some shirts. Love it. So what is the oh yeah, go ahead.
Kimberly I think you're with Sputnik moment. You've mentioned another way of handling, kind of like carving out that space for team members to participate in community work. A flexible and understanding management, like, right? That's absolutely one way to do it. It's basically, it's taking the same intent that we have and, working through with conversation to make sure people are have that ability and feel comfortable joining. I myself, my brain and the way I track things, it's like so mechanical. I kind of needed something, or at least my influence is big at North Peak, and because of that, we now have like somewhat more of a mechanical system for this.
And, we do have a bit of time. So if anyone else has any questions on the billables, on the best practices, feel free to chime in, ask questions. If you do something similar, feel free to unmute and let everyone else know how you handle it at your org or your company, I guess. In the meantime, I'll answer this other question about what is the prioritization process for ideas for the open source commons? And based on this experience, what would be the things that you would do differently? I might need some clarification on the differently part, but essentially what happens is new ideas all come from the community. So we don't source ideas internally at Salesforce for what we think the community should work on. It doesn't work that way. It all comes from the community. So I keep my ears to the ground. People know internally at Salesforce and in our community that I'm the open source program manager. So they'll send me ideas, leads almost, I guess you could call them. I look at the hub, I look at the Trailblazer community, I look at Twitter. And people fill out a question when they register for one of our sprint events, which is, do you have any ideas you'd like to see at the next open source sprint? So I have a process of engaging with volunteers. I don't have a process of prioritizing ideas. Ideas are prioritized by the community. So if somebody has a good idea, my first suggestion is for them to talk about it with others. And post it on the hub, post it on Twitter, say, hey, I'm thinking about bringing an idea to the next open source sprint event. Hey, I'm looking for volunteers who are interested in this, whatever the gap is that they're trying to solve. And I encourage them to do that, take ownership of it, be a leader. And that generally is how we get new ideas into the event. And when we do a sprint event in person, of course, we sit down at a table, you can bounce ideas, things organically happen. But when it's virtual, it's a little harder. And so I found the best way is really to encourage, other types of virtual collaboration, whether it be the hub or otherwise. From a perspective of differently, I'm not quite sure. So feel free to post in the chat a clarification or unmute. And in the meantime, Claudio, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was thinking probably in terms of the process itself, getting people together. A lot of the things you talk about, tracking time, organizing, because this is a lot of management, right? People can work alone in a lot of the tasks, but putting all the tasks together in a project takes a lot of work. So, and based on all the things you have done, I'm just thinking, what would be some of the things that you would change and do differently, because now you have the experience of all this work that was completed.
So I think that question, I'm going to look to Sherry. I'm looking at you. So there is a lot of work, right? I mean, you're essentially a volunteer App Exchange partner.
Yeah, exactly. Go ahead.
I was going to say, and we know, what that means. It's everything from literally planning the roadmap, running meetings, building the thing that's the goal of your team, to customer support, documentation, marketing, right? Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah, so it is a lot. I think that it's hard to say what we would do differently now, because the program of open source commons grew up around and as a result of Outbound Funds, right? When we first started, we actually just took the experience that Brian talked about at the beginning of that team member that was on the project had done something that brought a bunch of different voices together. she actually took a project management template that they had at North Peak and put the Outbound Funds project into it. And we directed it that way. We led it as if we were leading a consulting project to build a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's totally different, right? With open source commons, there's a lot more resources. We have GitHub, which is where everything exists now. There's a lot more structure around it, but it's a lot of work in between sprints, and the core team has spent hours basically doing all the things, and it's a lot of project management.
Yeah. And that's why we, Brian and team North Peak, they wanted to share why you should do this, because they know it can be a lot of work. And that's why we have at least 5 people on every team, right? Sherry, you all have a role to play. There's someone that does everything. So not one person has to do it all. And that was very, very key early on, was encouraging, if you're acting like an AppExchange partner volunteer team, then make sure you have enough people and fulfill all the roles. And so I counsel all of our different project teams that we have in the open source commons to do this. And teams size range, but so far so good. Yeah.
I was gonna say, and one thing, I want to say one other thing, and then I wanted to answer Arturo's question.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that we had assigned things, if you remember, I said I did documentation back in 2017. I literally sat in my house and wrote documentation. Like, that was my job on a team of like 8 or 9 people. So.
Yep. Someone plans meetings, someone takes notes. I guess the thing too, just to add to that, is don't be discouraged if it sounds like a lot of work. It can sound overwhelming, but we're here for support. Yeah. And it's not as hard as it sounds, I suppose, at first, if you do it step by step by step.
Well, and really you're joining a team.
Exactly.
It kind of leads into Art's question or Arturo's question. I mean, basically, this is kind of it's hard for me to answer because I don't dictate here. Like, it's not like I've told Sherry to be the leader of this. It wasn't with our other team member as well. There's a bit of just kind of being open to involvement, having someone get in there, look around, figure out what needs to be done, and does that connect with them? Are they interested in that? And are they going to spend time on it?
And as the person joining a team, well, I don't know. It might be my personality. I would never walk into a team and be like, okay, I'm in charge here, let's go. But there's always a moment where it's just a group of people. Like, it's a team of people figuring it out. And you might be listening for the first meeting or 2, but there is always something that needs to be done. We're all, like, as a team, we're always thinking, who else can come in and do something? And so if you're willing to do the something, that's how you get involved. Right? It might be they need somebody to build the flow. It might be they need someone to write documentation. It might be they need somebody to handle QA because nobody knows that piece of it.
Yeah.
For most of the teams, they're just excited that they have that you're joining them and that they get to know you and you're part of the community.
Right.
Agreed.
And from the business's perspective, how you then translate that into like a business benefit, which is also part of that question, I think. Mm-hmm. It's entirely been self-driven for us. We're not well connected with Salesforce.org AEs. It's not, the value that we've created in terms of being known as a partner that is skilled in this is kind of entirely our doing. And your team, if they should get involved and be invested in it, you'll find ways to talk about it and basically start to build a message around your expertise or your involvement, your giving, however you want to kind of recognize that business benefit.
All right, I have to put my session owner hat back on and step back from panelist. We are technically at time. Can we believe how fast this has gone? So the next thing, I had a slide for it, but we don't really need to look at it. It's just reach out to us on Discord. So we're in the Discord. Reach out to us, Sherry, Brian, myself, we're all there. Thank you all for asking questions. Thank you all for joining us. Let us know how you can get involved or how you want to get involved, and we will give you information.
Hope this was helpful. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Corey. Thanks, Sherry.
Thank you.
Thanks.